coming today. As I started to say, this is site building with solar. I'm going to do an overview of solar. I'm going to show you how to set up solar. I think I'll go through that pretty quickly because based on talking to you in the audience, you probably all know how to do that. And I'll show you some examples of things that you can build with solar. Some examples of things that we built recently. And we'll dive into code, we'll dive into the solar interface, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. I like the fact there are a lot of developers here. We can talk about what we can do with it. One of the key things I want to get into in this is that you can use solar beyond the search page, and that you can build components that are reusable site building components. And that's a big part of what I'm going to try to focus on today, and think about how we can use solar to build a block, build a paragraph, build a component that a site builder can then go and drop into the site and build more flexible Legos for the site using solar. Myself, just to introduce myself real quick, my name is Jason Yarrington. I am a software architect. I've been doing it for a long time. I actually started out, I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I tried to get this little video of my daughter saying nerd alert, which we send around as a meme to our friends. I started out studying my master's in sociology and demography at Penn State, and came out of school in 1997 and went to work for the Census Bureau for about 4 years as a statistician and survey manager. From there, I migrated into all sorts of different software startups, fell in love with programming all over again, and have been coding and programming, building sites and apps ever since. Currently, for the last 5 years, myself and my business partner run a small software engineering, web development, mobile development shop up in Salem, Massachusetts, where we build stuff that we really enjoy building, work with clients we really enjoy working with. So that's my quick little blurb. You can find me, it's always Jason Yarrington on whatever. There's really not that much interesting out there on social media for me unless you want to look at pictures of my food and my kids. That'll be me. So again, this will be really quick for a lot of you. It sounds like those of you in the room have a lot of experience, aren't here just to learn what is solar, but lots and lots of sites using solar. Every time, I think these days, every time you look at a site that has a really complex, fast search experience, or really complex, fast, smart content recommendations, trending, ability to find comments, and so forth, there's either solar on the back end or something similar, right? It's either going to be solar or Elasticsearch or some sort of search engine. There's if you go up to wiki.apache.org, you can see this list of servers that are using solar that goes on and on and on. This is only the first page. It goes on for like pages and pages of stuff. But some popular names you're used to hearing: Instagram, Netflix, OpenIndex, E-Trade, Redfin. So not just site content, but kind of everything. So what can you build with solar? Well, the most obvious one, of course, is a search page, right? And we talked before we started the session. This is the most obvious thing we think about. And again, I will just glance over it in this session, but even if out of the box you take Drupal and you fire up the database search, I would look into firing up the solar search and getting started. Because most of your hosting companies are providing solar out of the box as well. Right? If you go with Pantheon or Acquia, solar is probably included or can be turned on pretty quickly. It's going to give you better searching, it's going to be smarter, and it's going to take some load off of your server. As you get a little bit more advanced with search, you start to build faceted search. So faceted search, UX designer that I talk to often talks in terms of directed search. He calls this, not just providing the ability to filter by a taxonomy, but to actually guide the person and be smart. So if we do a standard Drupal search, we can create facets where we can do a drop down and we can say, I want to see all the couches, I want to see all the furniture. But if you look, if you've had your experience with faceted search in SOLR, we can see how many items will be in this set we've searched down to. So in this screen grab, you've got, I've searched for lounge sofa. Well, there's no phrase lounge sofa. So one SOLR has figured out, maybe I mean sofa lounge, or maybe I need the combination of words, and it's come back with my 6 best results. But in there, it's narrowed down my categories, it's narrowed down my colors, it's narrowed down my materials to only answers that would find more results in this subset. So on this particular website, there's like 300 colors, but they don't matter. And so for the user, we want to direct them. There's no point in picking a pink couch because there are none. There's no point in picking a yellow couch because there are none. So let's take a look at that real quick. I mean, you've seen. So here's that actual example from a website. So if we go back, all of this is coming right in from your SOLR search API and your basic standard views. So if we go back and we clear our view, let's see how our internet's doing today. We come back, this site's got 8,140 products in it. If I want to kind of filter down the bars quickly, there we go. And if we collapse this and we take a look, the colors are telling me if I click that, I'm going to get 5 results, right? And we're back down to 5 results. It's going to be smart enough to configure this to do the ands and the ors as we need. So I think it's a small distinction. Those of you that work with SOLR a lot know this, but if you do a standard search, it's not necessarily going to pull that back. That's a lot of calculation that's going on when you do a search, right? So we ask for the products that match, and SOLR Smart uses smart algorithms to get it, but we also ask for, based on the results, give me these counts, and that came back, super, super fast. Then we can continue on with that and follow that same thing and build a whole menu for a site out of it. So we helped, this is not a dribble site, but we helped build out the navigation for TJ Maxx, and it's the same thing. They're behind the scenes, they have a massive SOLR instance, and they're actually building out all of the menus and actually changing the counts in the main menu as you go. So on the left side, you've got menus. On the right side, you have facets, but they're working the same way. They're using the same technology behind the scenes. And then, of course, like we talked about in the back, you can do more complex applications with SOLR. So this is an application we worked on over the last couple of years for Northeastern University, where we helped redesign the course registration system for students. So again, thousands and thousands of courses. We combined within SOLR their course catalog, descriptions, and then inventory. And again, it might be a little hard to see on that screen, but if you look in that right column where it's saying there's a prerequisite required, there are 7 matches to your query, there are 4 matches to your query, there's 3 matches to your query. We're mashing up data we're getting back from SOLR that's saying, we send a selection that says, we want everything within this curriculum. And then it comes back and says, well, here's everything in this curriculum, and here's all the sections that are open that match your requirements. So the requirements for each student are unique and different, so we pass a different query back to get the different data. Within SOLR, again, some of this is review for you, but we can do booting. There's my first typo. We can do boosting. We can do spell check. I love that I put spell check right below booting. So this is, again, what, before I kind of discovered SOLR and my data nerd lights went off, a client would come to me and say, we want to build a physician search. We want to be able to search on specialties, departments, languages they serve, their gender, how close they are to us. And we want to randomize the initial listing, but then after that, we want the listing weighted. We want to do all of these things. So when we had to code this from scratch and we didn't use SOLR, we're kind of sitting there like, you know, if you take a mental moment and you put yourself back in a day where you don't know about SOLR, you don't know about Elasticsearch, and you start building an entity model in your head and the fields and the taxonomies, and then you start thinking about the view and the queries you're going to write. You start to sit there and say, like, how am I going to test this? How's it going to work? How are we going to configure this? But again, what you're looking at is a SOLR view. Is a Drupal view using SOLR with a little bit of configuration on the back end of SOLR to give us some stuff. We can do so. Stepping back again, a lot of you have used SOLR, but I pulled this diagram out. If you search for a SOLR architecture diagram, you see this simple little diagram that they have up on Apache.org come up over and over and over again. And I think it's an important one internally when you're trying to explain how you're using SOLR, what you're using SOLR, where it lives in your database. It's a simple diagram, but it's very meaningful. And I think I've pointed to it hundreds of times over the years. Your content management system is Drupal, right? And SOLR is another server. And we're feeding that data from the content management system to SOLR. And then we're putting that into the end user application. And so in a standard Drupal site, that end user application and the content management system are pretty tightly linked. But, you know, as Therese is going to talk about tomorrow, and everybody's been talking about, more and more they're getting more decoupled, right? So the end user application is really our web application. It might be served up using kind of standard Drupal pages and so forth, but it might be a React application, it might be an Angular application. And then your data source, you know, in general, like in Physician Locator, is just information we've entered into the content management system, into Drupal, but oftentimes it's a feed, right? One of the reasons my data nerd brain got all excited when I first learned about Drupal was when I first saw feeds and the migrate module and the flexibility that I could do by just pumping data into it instead of having to enter it. So we've been doing that for years, of pumping data into Drupal to build a richer, related data set with a really useful object model. But searching it then becomes problematic. And SOLR flattens that back out and gives us that. So to set SOLR up, it's pretty simple. We'll take a look real quickly. Again, most of you have seen this, but we'll look real quickly at setting this up. But the steps, again, if you're teaching people internally, I boil it down, make it simpler, and I say, look, you're going to define a schema. We're just going to tell SOLR about the documents we are storing, right? We're going to say, this is what I want to store, this is what I want the field names to be, this is the type of data in each field. So the beauty is, out of the box, the Drupal modules do a lot of that for us. You're going to deploy SOLR, you're going to feed it a whole bunch of documents, and then you're going to expose that search functionality in your application. So let's take a look. Let me break out to a demo for a little bit and walk through it. And again, I know a lot of you have seen this. If you want to do this on your own at home, today I'm using Acquia's Dev Desktop and my own standalone SOLR server that has a couple of different versions of SOLR. You can do this with a hosted SOLR instance, and if you just go to the Search API SOLR site on Drupal.org, they have lots of demos, lots of information. I'll walk you right through it. I'll do this really quickly with the idea that most of you have seen it, and the rest of you can go do this on your own. They also have full-blown Drupal VMs where you can just, as you're installing the VM, you can also tell it, install SOLR and run it on the same machine. So let me break out for a second. I have a little bit of tabitis going on today, so. All right, so let's just take a look at a simple site. So here's our, here's an upcoming site for Boston Medical Center. Again, a very simple search site. with just kind of everything. And we'll take a look at how that's set up. So first off, on SOLR, I'll jump in the back end a little bit, see if we can, that's super small, huh? Yeah, here we go. So your SOLR server is a Linux server running Apache with Tomcat or with a Java-based web server. Again, I'm going to skip over a lot of the steps, but you're basically going to download it, install it, configure it. When you go to configure it, the main configuration, you create a folder for your configuration and a folder for your data, right? So here's my configuration folder for my Drupal search SOLR instance. These files are copied right out of the search API, and I'll show you that. I might be going a little bit backwards here, but basically all I did was copy the files out of my Drupal module. So if we go into search API SOLR, in here you're going to find the SOLR CONF. I can't make that bigger. And then you're just literally going to copy all of those folders over. So in a more complex SOLR application, you might go and define, we talked about defining the schema. You might go in and edit this XML file and define all of the fields exactly the way you want it in painstaking detail. And we've had to do that for some really custom things. But in general, I think 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, for Drupal, you can just grab those, put them on your SOLR server, and then go to your SOLR server through the web browser and configure it. So let's see. So this is my SOLR server running on my box. When I get here, here are, so your database in SOLR terms is your core. So it is, Drupal search is the core that we're using today to take a look at that e-commerce site. And here, if we look at the configuration of this, you can see that's that directory I was just showing you, right? So on my server, it's var SOLR data Drupal search, var SOLR data Drupal search data. And when I go to add a new core, I go to core admin, add a core. That's what it's asking you for, is just where is that folder on that server. So in the case of a hosted solution like Acquia, Pantheon, or others, this is already set up for you. Right, so the Acquia connector, Pantheon connectors, and so forth, or will have this set up for you, and they'll give you this information. So when we actually go into our Drupal site and we go to configure it, we enable the search API, we enable the search API SOLR, and then we go into here. We edit this. Oh, I won't do that one. Sorry. I'll do the other one in a minute. Sorry. We added the server. The server is going to make our connection over to our SOLR server. And all this information you just enter when you set it up. In this case, the Acquia connector has created this one for us, but it's the same thing. So that's that URL. On my local host, it would be my local IP at 8983 and the name of my core. So if I'm over, computers like to go slower when we're demoing. Here we are. So on this server, you can see I've set up 3 different servers. I have or connections to 3 different servers, and I bounce back and forth. So here's my Acquia connector. Here's the link to the server I just showed you. And I can actually move this. This is kind of neat. I can move this index between them. So I move my index generally to a local server so that I can, if I'm doing something more complex. And so I'm going to try to keep speeding up because it's amazing how fast the time's flying. So then we talked about defining your fields and what you're going to index. Well, so when you come in here to the actual index that's going to go on that core, you define your data sources, right? So these are your entity types. We have a bunch of custom entities on this site, and we have everything from products, pages, e-commerce things like orders, order items, things that people have created, and so forth. And then once you've selected your data source, your entity, you go in, you tell it, I want all the bundles, or you could tell it just some of the bundles. And then you're going to define the fields. And again, if this part caused a lot of trouble for a lot of people when we started working with it, this is where you're defining the field type. So this is why we don't have to edit the schema file when we're using Drupal, because we're essentially setting the schema here. And this is where you're going to find, like, if you want to be able to do text searches, you have to set as full text. So if we want to be able to search the color by color name, we're going to set it to a full text, and we can tune how the different searches work here. So I'm going to zip ahead because I want to make sure we have plenty of time. But that's very quickly how to set up SOLR. And if this was a comprehensive session on how to set up SOLR, we'd spend a lot more time and stuff. But once I do that and I index my data, I have my data inside SOLR, and I can go over here and we can see those documents in there, right? So here's 11,820 documents. If I go to my query page, this is what a SOLR query looks like. Right, so it is just querying for anything, and it's grabbing back the top. It's grabbing back the top 10 documents, maybe just a page of documents, and it's bringing back those fields that were defined in the search API. So let's jump back. So what do we want to do with that? So great. So now we have it set up. We set up our index. We can look at our SOLR admin. And I really do. If you've never set up SOLR locally, I encourage setting up locally and playing with it. There's a lot you can learn and start to understand by playing with the admin. We can put in a synonyms file. On our physician one, we had to set up a synonyms file because we wanted to be able to search abnormal pregnancy and get back information about ectopic pregnancy or cervical pregnancy and so forth. So anyway, if you want to read more, let's talk about building some practical things. So we can build search pages. We can, out of the box, you get the search page with views. We can create a search page for specific content types. So sometimes creating a physician finder is as simple as duplicating the search view and just changing the base fields of what we're searching for. And then we can add facets. So we showed a couple of examples of that. Let's keep moving. I'm going to show you how, I'm going to kind of jump ahead and cover facets while we talk about this. So the big example I want to dig into today is show you an example of how we took SOLR, Drupal views, Drupal facets, and then we wanted to give this client the ability to create sort of unlimited, flexible category pages. Because they wanted to group their products however they felt like grouping them on the fly. But at the same time, they want to keep it simple, right? So we set up a very standard setup where we created taxonomies, right? Categories with subcategories and so forth. And we created material, we created taxonomies for material, for style, etc. But we discussed it, and instead of just creating the menu based on the taxonomies, we said, we're going to create paragraphs. They're going to go in there and say, I'm going to create a category page. I might want to give it a hero image. I might want to write something about the category, and then I'm going to drop in, here's the search. I want you to look at corporate chairs in here. There's no sense in looking at tents and other stuff while we're looking at this. So to do that, let's go dig into some code now. It's actually fairly simple. I was really, really proud of the work we did, and then at the end I was like, all right, that's kind of stupid simple. But I like stupid simple. It usually means we did a pretty good job. Okay, so first off, we created some paragraph types. So we went into structure, paragraph types, we created a lot of paragraph types for other things too, but where's my Capra page? Product listing. All right, so when we take a look at this, it's actually a fairly simple paragraph. How many of you worked with paragraphs? Oh. So in here, our paragraph has two fields, right? A title and a category. The category is an entity reference field to the taxonomy of category. And then the managed display almost didn't matter at this point because we're going to just take that over when we render it anyway. But by using paragraphs, we can now attach this product listing paragraph to a page. We'll go back and take a look at that chair page. And they're going to go in, they're going to put in a hero, they're going to put in the product listing, and they're just going to list the categories that they want in there. Now, we could extend this, and we talked about extending this and saying, well, we could give them whatever they wanted to search in here. We actually did that on the hospital website. They wanted unlimited flexibility to manipulate the search and have control over the documents that came back. But we know what happens when we give unlimited flexibility. If you want unlimited flexibility, here's PHP Storm or your favorite code editor, because all we're doing is exposing that code to you inside CMS. So this worked out really well. It was a good compromise. So there's a couple of other things, though, that we're going to need before we jump into code. Inside our views, we talked about views earlier, we basically duplicated the standard search view. We took the search view and we said, let's create a block. And we tested this in a block first before we even put in a paragraph and got ourselves confused in the code. We just we created a block view for product listing. And in this block view, we are, again, using our search as the source. We're telling it to show rendered entities. The settings for these rendered entities are, a display mode, a search listing. So we're actually controlling what it looks like over in the display mode. So again, I also like to stick to things that make sense later for the person doing their job down the street. So my partner in crime on this project had to do all the grids and all the layouts and everything. He wanted to reuse them everywhere. And so we're like, all right, well, it'll be a display mode. If you just style that display mode. We put in a search form, we sort by relevance, and we're kind of done. So that's our view. And then if we set up our facets, which is in configuration, not structure, we set up facets for our categories. So in here, we have to point in a view for our facet source. So here's our product listing block view that we just created. And then you're just picking the facets and you're configuring information about the facets. So we left everything visible, but in facets, we can go in here and we can say, show the top 5, make them drop downs, make them lists of links. We like checkboxes. We could set a soft limit and say, show 10, and then show a label that says show more, so that we don't show everything. And a whole bunch of configuration in here, right? So we can limit how many, we can limit kind of everything about this. And this was another one that kind of made my data nerd brain go off. We were looking at big e-commerce sites and saying, like, how do they create that kind of complex search functionality? And a lot of smart people in the Drupal community have boiled it down into configuration that you can do in here. All right, so then we've got our facets. Our facets create facet blocks. So if we go over to structured blocks, we'll see them listed, but we won't actually place them in the layout. Because we're going to use them in paragraphs, we're not dropping our blocks anywhere into our block layout. So over here, we don't see them in our standard block layout. We just have a pretty simple content block layout. And over here in the custom block library, we'll see the blocks. But that's kind of a standard paragraphy thing to do, right? I don't want to, actually I won't even see them unless I try to place it. So if I say add block, it'll pop up in the list. So we just end up doing it in the paragraph alter. So, paragraph preprocess. So when we go to preprocess paragraph, here it is. Is that big enough? So when the paragraph goes to preprocess, we go and we look up and see if there are any categories in the category field. And then we loop through the categories. This comes up later, so this is a hack later. You don't even need this at first. All we need is the categories and the category IDs. And I'll show you what we're doing with this in a minute. And then we just build that into a filter, which is going to get passed into the search filter. So we say we want this ID plus this ID plus this ID plus this ID. So a plus means, an or, this category ID or that category ID or that category ID. And then we're going to figure out which facet block keys. So we didn't want to show every facet. We were just going to show color, material, and style. And then I'll come back to this in a minute too. And then basically we go down here and we get our view. So there's our, if you've done this before, you can just use the views, get view static call and say, I want to get my view. I'm going to double check that I got it. I'm going to set my display to block, which is that ID from the view. Init my handlers, pass it some settings. I want to be able to show the search form. And then set those arguments, right? So I said, I want to pass in category filters, argument 1 or argument 0 to the view. And then we execute it. And then we have a rendered view that we can place on the page. And then we do the same thing for facet blocks. So we say, okay, well, for each facet block, let's also loop through, go create an instance of that block, and then render it. And then now that can all be passed, right here we're going to pass the block and we're going to pass our search form back into the paragraph. Does that make sense? I kind of jumped from the basics of SOLR to showing you my chicken scratch code in like 2 seconds. Did I lose anybody? But it's really, the key is that, once we have the view and we know how to render a view in code, now we can just put it in the pre-process of anything, right? So we love this for paragraphs. We're like, let's just pre-process the view, put it in the paragraph. And so now we're just using the paragraph as a place to hold settings. And that worked pretty cool. So we were thrilled about that. And then the client said, that's great. but my other CMS with my other commerce module let me woo my clients and put everything in the exact order. You know, I actually don't want them sorted by relevancy. I want them put in the order I want them put in. And you see this in e-commerce a lot. They say, you know, that's all well and good. SOLR by default is going to bring things back by, if you're not searching for anything, then it's going to bring things back by the tracker results. So either the last item in or the last item updated, so it's kind of newest to oldest. And there are other ways you can set that tracker. But in general, we're like, well, don't bother with that. It's all about what's most relevant to what we're fastening on or searching on. And they're like, no, I want that green chair to be first, because that green chair is super important. And we're like, well, why don't we flag it as new and we'll put the new ones first? No, I want to put the green chair first. I'm like, all right, clients, always right. I keep forgetting we're recording. So what we did was a little tricky, and this is, I always love to have in the presentations at least one thing that we call janky. And I think this is a little janky, but it does demonstrate the what we can do. We sometimes call this an acceptable hack or acceptable level of jankiness. This is sort of an acceptable level of jankiness. We say, all right, well, we don't want them going around everywhere. It's going to, again, be a nuisance if on every single page, this is the order I want them in. We might as well have just built the site and said, all right, on every page, create a list of products, let them put them in order, and that's how it's going to work. But then we'd lose all that wonderful faceting, all that wonderful work that we're getting out of SOLR. So I try to keep it in SOLR. So I said, all right, well, let's do it on the taxonomy. So we're saying every time we show those chairs, we want those chairs in a certain order. And this, my demo site may not have that much data in here. But let's see. So if they're in this taxonomy, we create a list of, there's that list of products. So this is happening two ways. They actually tag the products into the category. So if I tag the sled-based black chair as a corporate chair, that's where they're maintaining it, because we're importing the products and we're saying this is the category I want it in. We're doing a little bit on the back end where we're creating a reverse relationship. I don't know if you've ever done this in Drupal, but it becomes kind of handy. There's an entity reference in both directions. So the product references the category references the product. And we do that, again, it's kind of my acceptable level of jankiness. On the product save, we go look at all the categories and see if they reference us or not, and we update the references. On the taxonomy form submit, we do the same thing. Now we don't do it. Why do we do it on the save and save on one and submit on the other? So we don't create a loop. So then we don't say on save do this, on save do that, and then loop around and around and around. So again, kind of acceptable level of jankiness. But it gives them now the ability to come to here. If they never touch it, all their products will still be here, but they can now kind of update this in either place. They can add products on the taxonomy, or they can add products. They can add taxonomies onto the product, and either way, the information will get updated in both places, and then SOLR will catch it. So then, back in the paragraph, this is where we get a little tricky. So SOLR will allow you to specify a sort. And this is where I say it's really valuable to have your own local version of SOLR, so you can play around with what's happening and you can see the responses. One of the things you'll find is on a shared hosted environment, there may be so many layers of error caching that you won't see the results coming back, you won't know what's going on. But if you do it locally, you can take the queries and put them right into the browser. So what we're doing here is, back up at the beginning, we went and we got all those entity IDs. We said, okay, well, let's loop through that group of entity IDs, get all the IDs, put them together into a comma delimited list, and send them down to the sort. But this was the gotcha. SOLR doesn't have this ability to say, here's a custom sort at render time, at query time. So at query time, if you said, okay, give me a bunch of products back, and if they're in this array, give them back to me in the order of this array. But what you can do is you can create kind of a janky query. This one is going to create a query that kind of looks like this. It's basically going to do a big, long, nested if-then statement, where it's going to say, if the ID I'm looking for matches this ID, then set its rank to its index. So it just creates a big, massive, like from your old Excel days, the if statements. If this, then 0, and then in there you put another if statement, and you just create these massive, long if statements. So kind of janky, but works. That said, so the reason why I even bring that up, that's something you probably never use. You'd be like, great, I'm never going to use that again. Another wasted conference. The reason I bring it up is because behind the scenes, what's going on in SOLR is Solarium, so another resource. And again, I'm diving a little bit more technical than I thought I was going to based on the folks in the room. But remember that what SOLR is, or what Drupal is using these days is the PHP library Solarium, right? As we've started to, years have gone by. Now that we're leveraging third-party libraries and not writing all of this ourselves in Drupal, go outside of Drupal and go and look at what's going on. The SOLR API is creating a Solarium client. So when we go finally submit that janky query, there's no place in the search API to do that. We're going to do that in the query alter. So that's just going to pass the view a weird chunk of data. But then you can intercept the query that's going to SOLR inside the SOLR query alter, Search API SOLR query alter. So this hook is where you can go in and do some really interesting things very quickly in a few lines of code. So in here, we added that custom search. So we said, all right, or that custom sort. We said, all right, if we're in this block, which is being used in our paragraph, then look and see if the query has this argument on it. So that's the argument that was added to the view. If you dig down into it, you're like, oh, there it is. And then we're going to say, all right, then if you're telling me how to sort, clear the sorts, go build this new custom sort function, and then add it. Add that sort parameter. And this code, this is one of those things that as people dig into doing this, it was another aha moment of like, this documentation isn't in Drupal.org. And I'm not going to find this in here because at this point, I'm in Solarium, right? It's even kind of telling me like right there, every once in a while, as bleary 1 in the morning, I'll look up and I'll look at the definition of my object and I'll be like, oh, there's a reason I can't find the documentation in Drupal core. It's kind of telling me this is a Solarium object. And if we get out here, all of that documentation you're going to find over on SOLR's site is going to be mimicked over here. And we're going to be able to do the same things that we can do directly through the JSON interface in this PHP interface, which is very convenient. And that gets us to there. All right, so let me hop back, see if there was anything else I wanted to cover. Oh, you know what? This is one more kind of cool thing in there. We also did something a little different than we usually do. We usually hide unpublished items from the front end altogether, or keep them out of SOLR altogether. In our case, we kept the unpublished items in SOLR. But then based on your login, we changed the query here. So an admin can look at the site and see what unpublished items they're going to look at. So you can do a lot of that stuff here. So we're at our kind of stopping point here, and I think I've sufficiently rambled. And yeah, I kind of hit all the things that we were going to hit. Takeaways for this, again, I suggest set up SOLR locally. Take a look at the Solarium documents, think about what you can do with it. Like we talked about at the beginning, once you start to think about, well, I want to put some content in a block, what can I do with this? The truth of the matter is, it's all about stacking this stuff up. There's tons of stuff I haven't had time to look at today, but you can do range searches, spatial searches, you can block things out, high, medium, low, trending. So anytime you're looking at a block that is like, I need dynamic data that updates, and you start to find yourself writing an entity query or writing something, stop and think, maybe I could create a block, write a quick little Solarium client query and get exactly what I want. And that's kind of the pattern we tend to follow when we're building these things. So thanks. That's kind of, I appreciate your time. You have any questions? No? Coffee? All right, well, thanks. I'll hang out if anybody wants to come up and ask anything or talk. I appreciate it. Thank you.